So we all face trust issues as leaders. It's just inevitable. The real question is, how are you going to adapt? Let's go over 36 questions that just may change your perspective on trust and leadership. Hey guys, I'm Dr. Liz Moyer, and I love to give summaries of some of the concepts I studied in my program. Something that comes up all the time is trust, and I want to start off with a really practical tool that can help build it in your organization. Okay, so insert Arthur Aron and his 36 questions. Really love this tool and recommend that you can do this in a small group. You can even have a large organization that has everyone come together and then break up in groups of two. So typically, if you're going to do this, you want to understand and give yourself 45 minutes for the entire exercise. I have done it in about 30 minutes. I wouldn't recommend going below that. What you're going to see is three sets of questions. Set one is here. You've got questions 1 through 12, and they're going to ask questions that are pretty basic. Set two will then go a little bit more in depth with these questions, just kind of digging a bit deeper and less surface level. And set three, y'all, these questions get pretty deep pretty quickly. And by the end of it, you've really learned something about this individual. I'll just point out a couple of questions for you. So as an example, if you and I are going to have this conversation and we're paired, you would ask me, hey, Liz, if you could have anyone in the world, who would you want to have dinner as a dinner guest? And I would say it would be my grandmother, who I never met. And I would maybe share a sentence about that. And then you could share, and maybe you are a Taylor Swift fan, and you could say, this is who I'd want to have dinner with. We would go back and forth. Make sure you set a timer for that 15 minutes so that you don't exceed it, because sometimes you just really start to have a great conversation, or you never know how far someone is going to explain. Just make sure it's very clear that it's a back and forth going from each question both parties are going to answer. So now when we look at set two, I like this question number 14. It says, is there anything that you've dreamt of doing for a long time? Why haven't you done it? So I would share, yep, I've dreamt of writing a book and it is in progress, but I'm not done with it. And then you could share, and maybe you talk about something that you're trying to do professionally or personally that's important to you. Same thing, set that timer, 10 or 15 minutes, and you have met the time frame. All right. So now we've gotten into some pretty tough questions. Yeah, number 33. As a mortuary officer, this kind of hit home to me. It is, if you were to die this evening with no opportunity to communicate with anyone, what would you most regret about not having told someone? And then why haven't you told them yet? And I could sit there and say, to be honest, I think I have told a lot of people, but I would probably want to reiterate to my family just how grateful I am for the sacrifices they've made. And same thing, you would sit there, you reflect and go from there. And this is just a really cool exercise. You can see I pulled this from Sunshine Parenting, no endorsement, right? Really, if you just Google Arthur Aron's 36 questions, you'll be able to find that. And I will put a link in the comments below. So if you do this exercise, there's three things I want you to keep in mind. Number one, always make this voluntary. I made that mistake once. I think sometimes people will feel a little uncomfortable and just not want to participate. You can also let them know if any of the questions make them feel like, nope, I don't want to answer. Let them know they have the right to say skip or next. Number two, make sure you have adequate time. Once again, if this gets rushed, you have really defeated the purpose of this. And then number three, make sure you have that pre-brief and post-brief, or the debrief, we would say. And the concept behind it is getting people that a little bit of introductory into what trust is and helping them think about, when we have conversations, sometimes that they're very, very baseline. We may have worked with someone for a very long period of time and not know much about them. And what's important on the debrief is to ask people what they learned and maybe what their perspective is on how you can build trust, maybe how quickly you can, or just what they learned about the individual they worked with. If you don't have time to do this exercise, here's my recommendation for this week. Go through the list, take 2 questions, and at your staff meeting, ask them. Now, I want to jump into another element of trust that's really important, and it's the concept of distrust versus mistrust. Now, in a perfect world, we want to build trust as a leader. And once again, I shared Arthur Aron's 36 questions that could potentially be a starting point. But something I didn't realize was that there really is a difference between mistrust and distrust. So imagine this. If you are new to a team, maybe let's say a sports team, you're that rookie. Well, People just don't have information about you. They're not sure the type of player you are, what your values are, and how you're going to drive. And so there's this sort of uncertainty that goes with it. On the flip side, let's say you've been on the team for a while, but you haven't been a great teammate. You showed up late, which has caused the team to have to run laps. You haven't always passed, and maybe you haven't studied the playbook, which has really hurt the team overall. What's occurred is you've created this deep-seated distrust, which is actually based on information. There's some fascinating work that was done by Stanford, a researcher by Kramer, that really talked about how you have to address mistrust and distrust as a leader. And so what we have to remember is, as a leader, especially when we're new, sometimes that mistrust is just occurring because people lack information about you. And this is really important for you to build that credibility with those small steps and actions that you take every day. On the other hand, with distrust, you have an uphill battle against you, because whether you knowingly caused this or you unknowingly did it, it's going to require way more work and sometimes an intervention. Because I've worked in special operations commands, I've looked at a lot of studies and looked at how teams interact, and it's very important for these small groups to have a lot of trust. And what they showed was that when there was mistrust in a special operations group, that with a little bit of competence and some reps, they were able to overcome that. However, if there was distrust in that SEAL team or that ODA, they had to really strip everything down and build it back up in order to be able to accomplish the mission. So where does that lead us as leaders? Because sometimes we just are in an organization where that's going to occur. Number one is we have to understand that we are going to be working with different levels of trust. But number two, and this goes back to some of the research done by Brene Brown, is that it's very important to be vulnerable. And the third thing is that when you are trying to build trust, you have to be able to first identify which category you're in. So I'm sure some of you have read General McChrystal's Team of Teams. He talked about this concept of shared consciousness. The formula is 1, transparent information, and 2, a really clear, defined purpose. And so we pointed out, even when trust isn't feasible, you can accomplish a lot. I also love the research done by Kouzes and Posner. Their research, spanning now 30 years, has done over 100 assessments, and guess what followers are looking for from their leaders? It's not necessarily trust. They just want you to be honest. And so when you're in an organization where you know something is off, which most of the time it's going to be, consider really focusing on that mutual understanding, but then having the honest conversation, saying, hey, I can see that there's not a whole lot of trust, or I can see that there's some concerns and I want to address them and learn how we can move forward. One of the key things, and this was really life-changing for me, I received feedback, and it was someone that said, hey, I want you to improve your relationship with this individual. And immediately when I heard them say that, I thought, well, they don't trust me. And really at this point, we had gone from mistrust to distrust. So what am I going to do? I'm not going to host an intervention. And, is this really worth my time? But what I realized was that person wasn't saying, hey, build trust with this individual. They were saying, figure out a way to work together, figure out a way to move forward. And that just reminded me back to my softball days where, sure, you didn't love everyone on your team, but you wanted to represent your school well, you wanted to hopefully win. And that really would supersede a whole lot. And the truth is that while we know that trust is wonderful, there's a lot of great research on psychological safety, and we want organizations where people do have high levels of trust. We see that less mishaps occur. We see that people are more productive. We see that retention increases. But we don't have to have high levels of trust in everything that we do. And you can think about this as it even relates to your relationships. I may really trust my financial advisor with my finances, but I may not trust them in another element of my life. And so we have to have those boundaries, those guidelines, and almost a decision matrix on what level of trust is needed to accomplish that mission and what level of trust is needed in the certain area that you're addressing. And here's the good news. There was a study by the Army War College that said that trust can be rapidly formed, especially in a crisis. But the formula that those leaders had was character and competence, which we can go back to The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. So the last thing I want to share with you is the trust triangle. It's another resource that I recommend having on your desk or maybe posted somewhere. And what this really recognizes is the importance of this concept. And this is a mental reminder for leaders to have competence, character, and consistency. And these are the components of trust, just said a different way instead of the triangle, but something to really keep in mind as you're leading in your day-to-day activities. So if you only remember one thing from today, well, maybe two, it's that Arthur Aron has 36 questions that can really help you start working on building trust in your organization right away. And then number two, as a leader, we have to discern whether mistrust or distrust is occurring. And regardless of that, lead with character, competency, and consistency. I'm curious what tools you have used or maybe that have not helped you in terms of trying to build trust in your organization. Please share those comments below. And if you found this helpful, please like and subscribe.